coming to you not live from an undisclosed studio location. Welcome to the HuttCast. Hey everyone, I want to welcome you to HuttCast. HuttCast is a pragmatic approach to several things that happen in life and happen around us. So tune in, check us out. If you like us, give us a thumbs up to HuttCast. Welcome to HuttCast. Today we have John Hoffman. John Hoffman is a senator of Minnesota, and he's on the line with us today. So, John, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Tim, it's great to be here, man. I tell you, this is. I wish we were in the same room, looking at each other, having a conversation, just like we would in your shop. But let me tell you a bit about me. I'm from Champlin. Lived here for 22 years. And actually moved back to Minnesota after being gone. I followed my wife around the country. She was a radio and television personality. And after our daughter was born, we said, let's move back to Minnesota, and we did. And Champlin was our beautiful, wonderful city to pick. And at the time, I was working for a couple of nonprofits and doing some work with the National Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center out of the University of North Carolina, but I was housed right here in Minnesota. And at that time, the Bush administration, there was a reauthorization that occurred on the Individuals with Disability Education Act, and I presented testimony in a hearing, and the Secretary of Education, Rodney Page, his assistant secretary, approached me and said, we'd like to appoint you to the Federal Interagency Coordinating Council. That was 2001, Tim. Mm-hmm. And I kind of smiled, and I went, "Oh, that process takes forever," you know. And
right.
And I said, "Yeah, absolutely, submit my name," thinking he was just going to submit my name, you know, just to do the thing. And 3 weeks later, I get this letter from the White House, signed by Secretary of Education Rodney Page. Congratulations on your appointment. Your first meeting will be December of 2001. And, of course, you know what happened in November of 2001. Everything was shut down, right, as far as air travel goes. And I was on one of the first flights into D.C., but we couldn't land at National. They put us at Dulles, and it was what an experience. You know, tensions were up, tensions were there, and but I got my appointment. It was a 3-year appointment from 2001 to 2004, which then that ended in December of 2004. And then at the same time in 2004, Denise Dietrich from Champlin was elected to the Minnesota State House of Representatives. And so that opened up a seat on the Anoka-Hennepin School Board. And because of my federal experience in education, I was like, this makes sense. My daughter's going to be coming into school. We got, you know, young school kids that we know, and so I applied along. There was 8 or 9 other people that were also applying to finish now Representative Dietrich's term. Mm-hmm. And I was appointed by the board to finish her term. Nobody knew me. And then I ran for office for that seat in 2005 and won by 88 votes. And so that was my first time ever running for an elected position.
Pretty thin margins there.
Really tight margins there. Absolutely. I mean, it was a very tight race. Was reelected then in 2009, and then was voted on by peers to be the vice chair of the school board. And it was interesting because I'm sitting there listening to the policies and the budgeting that comes from the state level down to the local level, and here's the school board, right? We're in charge of $42,000 billion budget, and I got to tell you, the Anoka-Hennepin School District, 74% of the money that comes in goes to the classroom. I mean, at the time, administrative costs were just, hovering around 3%, and that includes principals. I mean, that includes, administration costs, which, those of us in business, which I do, I co-founded 2 businesses know that, that's a pretty lean budget to be at 3%. And we rewarded them by saying, well, I think you can cut it a little bit more and cut the budget by another percent. So it was 2.9% administration cuts. But we wanted to make sure at the time, Governor Pawlenty was saying, get as much money to the classroom. He wanted 65%. We were around 74, 75%. So we were pretty doggone fiscally responsible with the money that our local property taxpayers give us, right? And running an education system locally. And here's what got me, Tim. At the time, the local senator voted to what they did a school shift, meaning, all right, we're going to pay you your money, your local school districts, but we're not going to pay you now. We might pay you next year. Meaning local school districts then had to borrow money. And for us in Anoka Hennepin, we had to borrow like $86 million. It's those two numbers just because, it was a long time ago. But I'll never forget the second installment. I got to chair the school board meeting, and the U.S. Bank was in front of us telling us how this, loan occurs and what happens. And I just said, out of curiosity. So we were supposed to get taxpayer dollars that people already paid into the state come back to us. Now we're going to have to borrow in order to cover that, because the state decided that they would pay us, give us a promissory note, and just kick the can down the road. I was mad. And I asked the question, how much interest is this on the full piece? And he said, well, if it's the full piece, you're talking about $450,000, and just at the top of his head. And I said, you just took, not you, Mr. Banker, but the people that were supposed to be looking out for our local district just took 10 school teachers, right? 10 teachers out of our classrooms, period. That's what $450,000 is, 10 school teachers.
I see.
And at the time, remember, Tim, at the time, everybody was fighting about, oh my God, classroom size, it's going through the roof, right? Which is tough, it's stressful. And somebody on the board said, well, you're so angry, Hoffman, why don't you go ahead and, why don't you run for Senate? And so I will. And then the next day, I'm getting a phone call from the paper saying, so I understand that you're going to run for Senate. I said, I never said that. Well, yes, you did. So I did.
Is that how you got your start going?
That's how I got started. Been a member here in beautiful Champlin and was elected in 2012. Took out an incumbent and won. Got appointed to both the policy and the finance committee and education as a freshman, which really never happens. But what we were able to do was to initiate two things. Number one was to pay back the schools within that first year. We made that commitment. And number two, we elevated to all-day, everyday kindergarten, which we knew for years. Anoka Hennepin was like, was it half a day? Is it every other day? There was just this piece that the constituents here were saying, well, look, why don't you just go to all day? Why don't you make it every day? Kids in kindergarten are ready to learn. They want to go. They want to thrive. And so we did that. And that was, I think, some pretty good achievements at the time. So there we go. That's who I am. That's my background. I absolutely bring that federal experience to the position I sit in right now. And I'm always thinking systems, right? I'm a policy wonk, Tim, when it comes to having systems discussions, specifically in education, health and human services, and energy. And so I seem to be carried around that whole piece. So thanks for having me today.
Well, thanks for taking the time to jump on. Okay, so if we're going to move on here, so what I did get on the web was you were from Casper, Wyoming originally.
Yeah, my dad was a geologist. My father was a geologist for the Chevron Oil Company, and he used to take rock core samples, and I don't know, he was able to figure out that there was some kind of oil someplace in these core samples that and I remember all these rock core samples we had laying around our house. My dad would make them into paperweights, and I said, oh, this is kind of cool, right? But yeah, it was Chevron Oil Company was where my father was a geologist, and then at the time his brother then started a pyrotechnics company and hired my dad to be his production manager. And so we moved from Casper. I was just a baby to beautiful Minnesota, back to Minnesota actually, and stayed. And you know what, Tim? Every time I leave this state, I end up coming back. It's like What is this Minnesota thing that makes us always come back, right?
Well, we could ask some people that left and never came back too. I mean, I don't know. There's a lot on the fence there. So,
did you ever leave the state? Did you ever leave the state and come back? Did you ever leave?
I was born in Kansas City, Leavenworth, and did my.
Are you a military brat?
Kind of, sort of, not. No. A lot of military family. We have tons of family that was in the service, and that's why I hold them in high regards, because they are talking about my family. And with that, I take and I always try to side with the veterans every time I can.
Yeah.
So
it's near and dear to my heart. My father was in the Korean War, and I have a couple of his. I have his flag and his the plane that he was part of. There's a pillow that it has that inscription on it, and that sits in my office at the Capitol. And I've never wavered from the supports to our veterans. I mean, we don't do enough for our veterans, Tim.
As we should. And I'm going to segue this into some of the questions I have, and one of the questions was veterans and gun control. So stand by a sec. For home and workplace comfort, we here at Dependable Heating and Air Conditioning have over 30 years of residential and commercial experience in replacing, repairing, and doing general maintenance on your heating and cooling equipment. Call the experts at Dependable Heating and Air Conditioning. For all your indoor comfort needs, we are located in Coon Rapids and serve the entire Twin Cities area. Call one of our professional technicians today at 763-757-5040. That's Dependable Heating and Cooling. Again, 763-757-5040, Dependable Heating and Air. Okay, we're back. I had to take a commercial break there. So what we're doing now is, John, we're going to ask some tough questions. And, hey, if you're comfortable answering, great. Kind of general everything questions, just to kind of see where your head's at in the world. And you had brought up that your dad was a military vet, Korean War, and you have some relics from his service of duty.
I do.
Now, being that he is a government employee, I mean, he was in the military, he was a service member, what's your take on this this gun reform deal that Biden wants to throw out there as an XO? The gun reform bill, in a nutshell. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was wondering, what I know he did 30 executive orders. I'm not familiar with. Did he do a gun reform one? I'm not familiar with that. I've not seen that in the 30 executive orders. I know you had sent a HR or something that when I looked at it, that was a bill from 2020 and 2019 and 2020.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not aware of anything federally that's been introduced as of yet. It hasn't come down to me yet, Tim. I have not seen it. From
this bill, this HR bill that I've seen floating around, what I'm interested in, John, is can you break it down to a state level for us? I know it's a federal deal, that one I sent you earlier in an email, but we all know that Wallace is kind of like a gun guy. He's not there. He doesn't want to do that gun thing. What's your feeling on that?
So you have the only divided legislature in the United States, Minnesota. Minnesota is the only divided legislature. Most states either have all Republicans in both the House and the Senate, or they have all Democrats in the House and the Senate. And Minnesota happens to have the Senate is controlled by the Republicans and the House is controlled by the Democrats. And so that bodes to a couple of interesting dilemmas. Number one, if a gun reform bill is brought by one of the bodies and they're not having conversations with the other body, hence coming to some kind of agreement or consensus, then basically it becomes just an impasse, and you're going to have two sides pointing fingers at each other. So, having said that, I know that there is a couple. I think I don't know, Senate File 13 maybe, or Senate File 16 in Minnesota, and the companion in the House is not a Democrat companion; it's a House Republican. So the chances of the House hearing that same bill or even having that move through to a conference committee are very slim to none, especially if it's not something that two people have gotten into a room and said, well, you know what, we really need to do something and do something that's going to be, a compromise that both sides can agree upon. And until that happens, regardless of what you introduce, if the other body isn't doing it, you're not going to have any movement, Tim. So that's an impasse, and that's just a stalled concept that could occur with any bills that come on the state level. Now, having said that, if there's strategy for the governor to utilize any kind of gun control measures, hence I know there is global agreement on a couple of things. It's just how those global agreements look or roll out is the debatable question. I don't sit on the Public Safety Committee, and I don't sit in Judiciary, so I'm never in the day-to-day conversations with those committee members to see what how that does. The only time I would ever see something is if it came to the floor, hence, and tracked it through the committees that are there. That's why people like you that are my constituents that are forget more than a day on anything to do with guns and the Second Amendment need to be including me on conversations on really what's happening, what's going on.
Well, you had to know this was going there, right?
Yeah, of course. I mean, absolutely. But Tim, it here again, that impasse. If you truly want to see something happen, then reach across the aisle and have a conversation. And I say that because in the world that I have policy stakes in education and health and human services, 91%, actually overall 91% of my bills are bipartisan. This year, I'm on the same trend. Matter of fact, when you look at how that can make a difference, here's one. And we're going to talk a little bit about Mississippi crossings, but let's look at our whole area. Our region, our transportation needs in our region have been neglected for years. The last bonding session last year, our area, between three state senators, Jim Abler, a Republican, Jerry Newton, a Democrat, and me, a Democrat, we were able to leverage $110 million worth of infrastructure projects for our area. $110 million. Nobody else was doing that. You know why we were able to do that? Because we approached it not from a political partisan standpoint, but rather, what do we need? We need expansion on Highway 10. We need some safety over the bridges. We need the railroad crossing taken care of on Ferry Street. We need to get Sunfish and Ramsey. We need to finish what's happening in Champlin. And because of that approach, Tim, no other in the history of the city of Champlin would never ever get any kind of state dollars, and no other elected official has got the dollar amount that I've been able to bring just to the city of Champlin. Now include Coon Rapids and Brooklyn Park in that, and we're talking almost $50 million over a period of 8 years. But I'm knocking on $13 million just for the city of Champlin alone.
So $13 million in which was the council at the time? Which council in the city of Champlin got the $13 million?
Oh, it started with Mark Uglum, a Republican legislator, and I got the first $3 million for the new dam, and then I was on the LCCMR, and I was able to leverage that same year another $2 million from LCCMR money, and then the following biennium we worked with. Then when Zach Stevenson got in, it was another $3 million. In addition to, prior to that, another $3 million. So they just kept adding up to get what we're doing. And it's kind of cool. Drive by the mill pond now, and you see people actually ice fishing again out on the mill pond. I haven't seen that in years. They're
going to be trout fishing pretty soon too, but the mayor doesn't want his COVID to be slung around the world, so he put it on pause. And frankly, when I listen to it, and Ryan's a good guy, and I like the guy. I see different things than he sees. So when he wants to do a trout pond for him and this crew for one time a year, I just kind of shake my head and go, dude, what are you doing? Well, I mean, it's the event, and he's someone come out and said there was no city dollars invested in it, and I know for a fact there was. And here we are putting money into a trout pond that only you can use it one time a year, provided there's no COVID, and he couldn't have seen that. and I get it.
Well, we could easily added the DNR. There's three entities. You talk about trout ponds, and you talk about just that whole area over there. There's also the ability to create. There's some land. There's some land over there too that is a water right of way that the city needs some state and federal help on. But if you want to really convert a pond, a trout pond, let the DNR manage it. I mean,
Right.
if you're really going to do it right, Tim? I mean, let's make it totally accessible so Grandpa and Grandma and their walkers can be able to get to that trout pond and do some trout fishing. But then you leverage the state of Minnesota, DNR, plus the feds. There's the federal fish and game folks. They want to see some trout ponds. I mean, and that pond would be perfect for that. So, but that's something that on the local level they have to figure that out. If they want, at that point, then I could absolutely engage in and help leverage to get the DNR to make that a priority.
Well, you got to know that most of city council listens to this. They don't want to admit it, but they're doing it. And if you could tell them something, is that what you want to tell them? You want to say, look, if you need help, I'm going to reach out to this, and we're going to do this?
Well, it'd be easy if they, the city. But again, it's the city council. I mean, I am not gonna overstep my jurisdiction as your state senator. But I'll tell you what, I'll be the biggest advocate that you've ever had, and that's what I think the relationship I have with some of the city council members have said. They thank me for my advocacy on behalf of whatever something comes up. So if they need something on that, absolutely, then I'll circle the wagons, so to speak, and draw a line of inclusion and pull in the same people that helped leverage to get $110 million in bonding. I mean, why not? I mean, if the DNR steps in on this one, I think we're talking $60,000 to $80,000 of state money. But here again, though, I mean, this is where the city council has to decide. Do they want the DNR running the show over there, or the feds, right? And so, I mean, that's something they're going to have to measure that one and weigh out the pros and cons on that one. So,
well, it was a retention pond at first.
Right.
And then someone got the idea, hey, let's do a trout thing. And, I jumped in on that last year when someone had a contest for how many holes we had. It gave away some oil changes, some stuff like that.
Good for you.
But I wanted to, make sure that if these people are listening and if there's another avenue, that they're going to hear this and you're going to say, hey, circle that wagon and let's make this happen. Did any of the money that you created during the upgrades to the bridge and stuff on the Champlin side, was that, where did that state money come from? Is that state?
Yep. So that, everything, it was a mixture. Yeah, it is. It's absolutely that. The one, for the dam, that was bonding money. So that was money that the state bonded for and borrowed at like less than 1%.
Well, for some people that don't know what a bond is, you want to rough that for them real quick?
Sure. So usually what happens, I can come in and give a little history here of what happens in Minnesota in our during our terms in Minnesota, right? The legislature is tasked with passing a 2-year operating budget, right, for the state of Minnesota, and that happens usually on the first year of the biennium. And what happens there is the budget that gets established really dictates all the revenue and spending that's conducted during the fiscal years. And in this case, it'll be fiscal years 22 and 23, right? And you got to look at spending projections. You got to look at the budget balance. Where is the money, where it's coming from. It's all based upon some budget timelines, right? And for example, this coming week, the governor will submit his budget proposal, which will be due to the legislature, right? And then early in March, there's a February economic forecast that gets released, and that'll be the base for all spending decisions. And what do we know is that right now that there is a $635 million positive budget balance, and that's a $2.9 billion change from the May interim budget, right? That projected a $2.3 or $2.4 billion deficit.
Okay.
So
what all of a sudden it says, like, wait a minute, what did we do here? Well, our spending decreased by 1 billion since May, and our revenue increased by almost 2 billion since May. So there was a little offset there, but the real savings came from the federal medical assistance programs that are our state share, because we were able to relinquish or keep a lot of the state share of that, because we weren't providing services to people with disabilities during that time. And so they book that to the bottom line. And so that absolutely changes the financial outlook in Minnesota. But it's scary, because those are, when you're talking about the federal Medicaid programs, those are people with disabilities, and those are 65 and older folks, right? And so, but I'll get back to the budget. There's a $1.74 billion lower than the February 2020 that was projected, and what we have, though, going forward, though, instead of the $3.6 billion deficit into 23, the structural deficit is actually $1.6 billion. And so we still have money in the reserves, right? And so the state of Minnesota was actually budget reserve. We were a little over $2.2 billion in our reserves, and a lot of states didn't have that, but we did. Our reserve is at $1.8 billion. That's off of the 2019.
So how does this fit into the
tax bill? So first year.
Go ahead.
Yep. So the first year we set the budget. The second year we look at bonding. Bonding are based upon we would borrow money based upon your bond rating. And our bond rating is super high. Minnesota's got a super high bond rating, so we basically borrow money at like 1% interest over an extended period of time, and you pay that money back. So it's not like it's free money, but it's money that we're bonding, that we're paying back over time. But it's specifically supposed to go for infrastructure projects that have regional or statewide positives, right?
Okay.
So we put in 2014, I put in a request for $3 billion because our dam, Champlain Dam, which was built during the CCCP times, right, back in the 30s, was really not okay. And there was 60 acres around there that was not okay because it would have been a flood. It would have been a flood area, and so put in for a bonding. It was bipartisan, and Mark Uglum in the House, and that got approved. And that year we got that money for the dam, and then we also put in another $2 million for the LCCMR, which that LCCMR, that money, because you asked the question, where does money come from? So the bonding comes from the state borrowing, and then the LCCMR, which is a Legislative Citizens Commission on Minnesota Resources, there's a trust out there. So every time somebody does a pull tab at Hoodies or wherever, right, Clives, and we get a pull tab, money from those pull tabs and monies from the lottery tickets that you buy goes to this trust, which is the Environmental and Natural Trust that Minnesota has. That's about $50 million a year that then is available to go toward projects that are going to be for our Minnesota natural environment causes.
Okay.
Fishing, water clarity. However, I mean, people then submit proposals for it. And Todd Tunen from the city submitted a proposal to clean up the mill pond. Then it went. Then that year, because we were also then rolling into another bonding year, we submitted another $3 billion for phase 2 of getting that mill pond, fixed and ready to go. And of course that passed as well. I was able to do that again. That was bipartisan. Then we did it again, and this time we're set. I think we got one more project to do before Todd retires, to make that a regional attraction for people to get down to the beautiful Mississippi to fish, to hang out, and have clean water.
So in a nutshell, we borrow money against a certain fund, pay it back with a service debt with an interest rate.
Mm-hmm.
So the money that they took off of pill tabs, let me get my head around this. Some of that money goes to the state.
Mm-hmm.
And if another organization in the state wants to borrow it, which is a bond, right? Borrowing is a bond.
Borrowing is a bond, yeah. But the LCCMR, the pull tab money, that's a whole different set of. That comes from a different bucket of cash.
Sure. Well, it's still a bucket, and we're going to be paying that back. So there's service debt and there's an interest rate. So we're paying interest in the state level to collect interest to pay interest back to a fund that we got charged for in the first place. Am I on track with that?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, you're paying interest on long-term debt at basically less than 1%. I think the highest I've seen it ever is 1.1%.
Mm-hmm.
And then the residual from that is actually a plus for Minnesota. Now the
Right.
LCCMR money, that's not borrowed money at all. That comes directly from people's gambling. I mean, that goes into a fund, a bucket of money. But then it's required under Constitution. Remember when people said, yeah, we're going to allow gambling under the Constitution? It allows that money to be used for. So in this case, the LCCMR, it's for natural resources. But then there's other buckets where some money goes into for music, arts,
Mm-hmm.
legacy dollars, stuff like that, history.
Okay,
centers.
let's concentrate not on the LMCCR or whatever you were talking there. Let's say it comes out of a tax thing, gas or whatever that bucket is.
Mm-hmm.
And we got taxed on it.
Yep.
This organization borrows it from that organization, intercompartmental in the state, and then we pay it back with tax money, correct?
Yeah, you pay it back out of it comes out either the general fund, operating budget reserve. There's a formula, like everything else. There's a formula where that money gets paid
And
back.
with that payback, because we borrowed it over time, we had to pay interest on that again. Is that correct?
Well, you pay a
Service
nominal
debt.
amount of interest. But what the Minnesota Management and Budget has shown, that the money we recoup from creating jobs, the taxes that we collect from creating jobs and creating that infrastructure for
Mm-hmm.
long term, far outweighs the amount of money that you pay in interest on a small loan. So it creates a win-win, and it always has. Minnesota has always done well on the bonding and kept it right around, $1 billion. Every year there's $4 billion in requests for bonding, and we spend about $1 billion.
And I get that. What I want to make sure is that we're not paying interest on tax on interest.
No, you're not paying interest on tax on interest. No.
Because if we were already taxed on it once, and then we borrowed it back to a different program, and then we got to pay debt service on that, now we're paying interest on our taxes.
Yeah, now you've just completely gone over my head on that one. So.
Well,
to me, it's a simple. Is this money in? Yeah. Is this money out?
And I know I'm oversimplifying it, but I'm looking at big picture. So if we get someone to pay a tax on something, whatever that bucket is, and we borrow it to another organization in the state, okay,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to pay that back over time, and over time we're going to pay a debt service on that. So if it came from an interest-bearing or a tax-bearing system, which that first bucket was, we're actually, in fact, paying interest on tax.
Interesting. I've never heard of that concept, because you're paying, if the money being paid back is through the general fund, then some of that's collected through a tax. No, it's not a double. I don't think it's a double indemnity. I think it's just another. That money goes to pay for the debt services or the services that were there.
Sure. Then why would we pay anything interest-wise? Because if it's our money in the first place, or if it's the state's money that they got from revenues of buckets that were tax-based, now we don't have to pay that interest or the debt service on a tax.
Yeah, I don't.
More than, am I going too deep there?
Yeah, I don't think it's that complicated. I mean,
Okay.
that I don't think it's that complicated when it comes to the bonding, and that is.
So in a nutshell,
my understanding is we bond for X amount of dollars.
Okay.
We pay interest on that X amount of dollars from the general fund, that is, I don't think there's a double indemnity. I'm not seeing the line.
Okay. Well, I was just curious because I'm thinking, okay, if we got taxed on it, that means you've already collected our money, correct? That's A.
Yep.
And if interdepartmental, you retrieve that money to another department, another bucket inside the organization. But to do that, we have to pay debt service on that bond, that borrowing.
Oh, you know what? You're confusing. It's not for operational stuff. This is specifically for infrastructure. So the agency cannot just this is not a supplanted form of money that goes in there. That is absolutely not the case of bonding. Bonding must. That's why when I said early on, it either has to have a regional or a state effect to it. It cannot be agency dependent, right? It can't be used to supplant. You cannot. That's an interesting concept, though, that you bring up. That's the optics that are out there that would arise from that. It's kind of interesting. We always like in the LC. I'm going to go back to the LCCMR. There's always got to be a match somewhere within the LCCMR so that organizations are not using that money to supplant their daily operations, because their daily operations in an agency, a state agency, comes out of that first year in a biennium, which is the budgeting year, right?
Okay.
And that is not ever. I think we're constitutionally protected that is there, just like we're constitutionally protected on how that money gets spent and where it gets spent, right? So.
Got it. Well, I wanted to clarify because not everybody's in tune to that, and I needed some refresher as well. And I thought, okay, as long as I got the guy on the phone, let's ask the questions that would, the common people would ask. Because again, we're not engaged in this every day like you are. So again, not to oversimplify it, but to merely get my head around it. Maybe they're asking the same questions in my head. And we're going to make another section here, so everybody stand by. Now a word from our sponsors. Today's sponsor in part by Excel Roofing. Excel Roofing, they do it all. Roofs, siding, framing. You need a house? Give Excel a call. I've used these guys personally in the past, have a professional crew. They're conscious of your job, and they want to produce the finest quality of craftsmanship available. Excel Roofing, 763-712-0757. Again, 763-712-0757. Excel Roofing, Dayton, Minnesota. We're back from their sponsored commercials, and John Hoffman is with us today. John,
good to be here.
The last conversation we had, it was really, really intense, and thank you for clarifying some things about bonding. And now we're going to move to a different section, if you were ready.
No expert. I tell you what, I'm no expert in bonding, so but it was a good conversation because you raised some optics in there about how things are looked. But yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so each section I try to keep around 10-12 minutes, as you listeners know out there, that I don't want to get you so indulged with the details that I want you to hear the big picture. And we've already covered some of the crossings. We've covered the dam, some funding issues. Now let's go to a more of a background of what John's in the system for. And he's a very big advocate for Health and Human Services. He sat on that committee. And we're going to ask some questions about the mental health, the Anoka renovated homes there for the military, if you got any information on that. John, why don't you get me up to speed on your Health and Human Services? Again, be mindful that we got X amount of time per segment, so I need you to unabridge some of it. Go ahead.
I want to bridge some of it. Absolutely, Tim. It's good to be back. And, one of the things, I guess, in a nutshell, if you look at Health and Human Services globally and education globally in the state of Minnesota, that makes up to about 70% of Minnesota's budget, just those two agency buckets, right? And the other thing we know in Minnesota is that for the first time in history, we have more people 65 and older in the state than we do in the K-12 education system. So all of a sudden, the shift of balance of need goes to our 65 and older. Here's the kicker. 850,000 kids K-12, 950,000 people 65 and older. Next year it goes to 1.1 million people, and the cost then goes Medicaid alone because Grandpa and Grandma, right? Elderly waiver services, et cetera, goes from $1.1 billion to $3.5 billion. In Minnesota, we are a one-for-one state match. For every dollar, Tim, you and I place on the table out of our pockets, the feds match that. We are one of the few states that takes huge advantage of that. There's other states in southern parts of the United States that had that same ability, but they don't. And so Minnesota's always done that, and that goes back to, prior to Arnie Carlson. Matter of fact, Arnie Carlson, a Republican governor, he set up Minnesota Care. But here's the thing. Every dollar cut in our state budget will not slow our economic recovery. It will fall on the backs of the most vulnerable Minnesotans, hence that 70%. I told you health and human services and education, which have been a lifeline for Minnesota. It's going to be more important. We need to make sure, and this is why I exist. I'm absolutely making sure that Grandpa and Grandma and people with disabilities are not ones that are just set aside and forgot about. And so that's a Jim Ramstad taught me years ago, it's a non-political conversation, John. Leave your ego in the hallway. And he did. I'll never forget him saying that. He taught me so much. And he said, it should be nonpartisan, common sense, pragmatic. Focus on the goals of what you want to get. Pragmatic.
I know that word well. So I have a lot of friends that are special needs, and they know that you're on that page with them, and they really appreciate that. And so, just so you know, let's talk about the old mental health facility in Anoka, off of 7th Avenue there, and they're renovating that. And I've heard in the news that they were trying to get this all up to speed for their military vets. Do you know anything about that?
Oh, it's beautiful. You should go there. You should actually, Tim. I'll take you on a tour. They have 2 cottages that have been completely redone, and the third one that is almost there. Right, Jim Abler, who is a dear friend, been for 22 years as a state senator, and he approached the city of Anoka because those cottages were owned by the county, and the county wanted to just level them, destroy them.
I remember that.
And Jim's like, no. There's a need. There's an absolute need. We have homeless vets and so he did a private-public partnership. He took no state money, and he relied on. He pulled in a lot of the unions, IBEW, pipe fitters. They used that as a training facility for their.
Oh, sure, their services.
It's beautiful how they did that, and now you go in there and you go, wow. So what he did is he righted the wrong. And now you have a sober environment for people to come in and get their mental health needs taken care of, have a warm bed. They're part of the community. And then, the goal is to, get them to be independent again. And that's what they're doing. And you see people like Bart Ward and Ellen Ward who have just volunteered their time over and over again up there to really do some great things. I just dropped off 10 boxes of coats and sweaters and blankets that were donated by a company out of Minneapolis. Brand new stuff, and that's what they're relying on is really the good nature
donations,
of people
sure.
around. So and it absolutely, it's worth going to see, Tim.
We should do that.
That's easy. We'll set that up. We'll just get a hold of Abler or I'll just get a hold of Bart Ward, or you and I can just go up there anytime. But what he did was absolutely amazing. And then they reconverted the auditorium, and they're trying to get that up to where they can make that a community-based auditorium, and allow art events, hold events there. It's absolutely remarkable what they're doing. And then the third one that they're rehabbing right now that they're going to finish, what they're going to do is that's going to go specifically to the vets that have come out of St. Cloud. There's a rehabilitation, so it'll be it'll be that next level of care in order to get people.
So how does this differ?
Productive.
How does this differ than the Madison Foundation in Dayton? Sue Rawlings donated her property, which is the old Sesame Street Lives property. Vince and Rawlings and Sue and all those guys, they said, here, we're gonna donate this to you, and we want you to make a wellness center for vets. How does that differ, the Dayton one versus the Anoka one? Do you know anything about the vets in Dayton?
No, I don't know what the Rawlings did. I know that they did their foundation I don't know what the Dayton one. Are they also addressing the mental health? Because here's the thing with people. Here's what we find out: 91% of people that are homeless, there's co-occurring conditions. There's substance abuse and there's mental health and there's disability. Right? They're both in there. But what did the Rollins? What did they set up in Dayton?
Well, one of the, I think it was the nephews of the place. Sue gave her entire property and her land fortune to this nephew, who was, I think, a colonel. And I've talked to him a couple times. Great guy. His focus is on mental health. They're trying to raise money for this whole program that they're converting this house into a wellness center for exactly what you just said. But I don't know who the senator is over on that side who would have that input to help these guys. So when I heard this one was going on in Anoka, I thought, well, maybe they're kind of the same thing, but they're not, because I think one's more of a private based. I don't know.
Yeah, well, Jim's is basically private based. There's no state money going in there. I wonder if the Rollins Foundation, if they did, but Dayton senators Dayton is kind of split up. It's Warren Limmer on one part of it. Then the other part would be Mary Kiffmeyer. She has Elk River, Dayton, right? Otsego, a little bit. And I think that's it. Those two basically touch it. But the person that would be worth conversation of two, Bruce Anderson, who is the chair of the Veterans Committee in the Senate, in which we utilized his support, because we were running into some brick walls about, the fact that Anoka County didn't want to give those buildings up so easily, right? And so we worked out a deal where they leased the buildings or sold them to the city of Anoka for $1.
Sure, rolled it over, repurposed it.
It was one of those repurposed kind of things, but it was really Bruce Anderson and Jerry Newton. Jerry, he represents the other part of Coon Rapids. Jim Abler, Jerry Newton, and I all have a little piece of Coon Rapids. Jerry is Coon Rapids and Blaine, but he serves as the ranking member on the Veterans Committee that Bruce Anderson is the chair of, like I'm the ranking member of the Health and Human Services that Abler is the chair on.
So maybe we could get those guys a copy of this program, and they could put some ears on this.
Oh, absolutely. I think you should email me that. If you have a copy of that, if you could send that to me, that would be absolutely. And it's so cool to see what they're doing, because there's an absolute need out there. Absolute need.
Oh, without a doubt. And again, coming from a military family, we like to always put them to the forefront, because they are the ones that did carry this on their shoulders for years. And again, the Magnuson Foundation in Dayton, right off the 121 or 144, over by the golf course, is a really, really nice site. I've been through it. Sue's a great gal, and I want to push that out there so that if you do send this to somebody, that they can hear that. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move to the next segment. Stand by. Okay, and we're back with John Hoffman, Senator John Hoffman, and we're discussing today things about Minnesota, local, national, and pretty much everything in between. John, thanks for coming in today, or calling in today.
It's great to be here, Tim. Always good to have a conversation with you.
Okay, so what we're going to do now is let's dip a little bit into the federal scene. I know it's not your gig, but maybe we should just have a little conversation about common sense, because I'm kind of a Dr. Phil fan, and I listen to his words where common sense sometimes ain't common enough.
That's like Jim Ramstad saying always about these discussions got to be pragmatic and full of common sense, right? It's like people trench in sometimes. So yeah, I'm all ears, man. How are you?
We're trying to figure out, and I got a lot of listeners, and we're in a lot of countries. Not that this is going to be a thing for them, but, if it happens in our backyard, it can happen in theirs. So when Biden shut off this fuel pipeline, I don't know if it was a retaliatory strike against Trump. I quite can't figure out why he would push that button. And, for the guy who wants to say we should work together now, I don't see a lot of togetherness.
Interesting. Are you talking about the Keystone XL pipeline?
I am.
So he canceled. It's interesting because looking at the 30, he came in and initiated in 3 days 30 different executive orders.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question to me is, okay, well, what does that mean for our state local projects that we have that we're surrounding that? What do we have to do in the energy committee or the environmental committee to do that?
Exactly.
But here's what he did is he canceled. He put a stop on it, and he directed the agencies to review. Right, and so now he's given back the authority to the agencies to review more than, apparently there's over 100 Trump actions on the environment that he didn't utilize. His this always is a fight between administration, bureaucracies, and
Mm-hmm.
Congress, right?
Mm-hmm.
But apparently, agencies were not allowed to review. There was over 100 Trump actions on the environment, and they were not allowed to review it. So now what he did is he canceled that. He canceled it, and he directed the agencies to go back and review. So I would assume, based on that, I don't know anything other than that, Tim, that the agencies have a obligation and responsibility to go back in front of Congress and give updates, right?
Okay.
So I think what he did is he brought it back through the process that we've been known to utilize for many, many years. And so get the agencies to come in, get the science in there, and look at the 100 different actions that they were not involved in, specifically regarding the environment. That's all he did. He just said slow the roll here, people. We know.
Okay.
So.
Well, a lot of people on the street, and I've had a conversation on the way in this morning to the studio, and one of my conversations was a local gas station owner. It's Champlin Sinclair, and
Sure.
his name is Mr. Merkel.
I go to that gas station all the time.
And we have this conversation because he knows I'm a common sense on the fence, more leaning towards the right, and he is a total left. He likes that Democrat thing, and I'm okay with that.
He does, huh?
He's a total left, and he says.
Well, I'm glad I gave him my money. Then I did not know that. That's good to know.
And he listens to the show, and he says to me, he says, we had this conversation about the fuel prices, and then turn this down, and he says, well, once the fuel goes back up to $3 a gallon, the economy will be better. And I had to ask him, I says, at what point paying more is going to make our economy better? And he says, because that's the way things work. If you pay more for stuff, the economy's better. I said, what if you pay less and the product's more affordable? So I can't quite, and again, we're good friends. Jim and I are friends, and we talk quite a bit, and we have these discussions. So I'm just on the fence with if you're going to pay more to have a better economy, and he's thinking $3 a gallon gas is where it should be. And I said, well, Jim, this is still America. I would implore you to take your gallons of gas to $3 a gallon while everyone's at $2.10 or $1.80 or $1.90 and see what happens. And he looks at me and said, well, that would be foolish. No one will come here. I said, exactly. So if they won't come here at $3 a gallon and you won't make the charge to go $3 a gallon, you want to be competitive with everybody else or at $1.80 or $2.30, why don't you be the leader in this? So our economy can get better.
I love the conversation. I love the premise of the argument because here's the other thing I was thinking of, Tim, right? So if gas prices go up, right?
Then
they're
going up.
Then the tax on that gas goes up, right?
Yep.
And we know our state constitution says any money collected at the gas pump in tax must go to roads and bridges, period, right? And so I know that during this COVID piece, one of the things that scared the state economists was there was $400 million in lost revenue, and I believe that was the number, $400 million in lost revenue based upon the fact that nobody was driving anymore, and so they weren't collecting gas tax, so there was like $400 million in budget assumptions lost. Not the word lost, but budget assumptions that they put in place that if people drive, but in this case they weren't $400 million. So if it goes up to $3, then his argument is correct. I mean, it'll revitalize the roads and bridges taxes. It'll fill up that bucket of money that we know constitutionally must go. But yet at the same time, you're saying if I'm spending more money at the gas pump, I'm going to spend less money on other goods and services, right?
Correct.
So where's the payoff? How long did your conversation last with you two?
Well, I was out plowing this morning because we had that 5 inches, and I wanted to get back and make to the studio here so we could have our conversation. And I said, Jim, we'll have to table this for the next call or the next time I get fuel. And that's kind of where it landed. And again, he wanted to come in today and just hang out in the studio and listen to our conversation. And I said, well, he's going to be on the phone, so I mean, all you're going to do is hear me. But he was, we have these conversations quite a bit about left and rights, and he's a very intelligent guy. So I like to get inside his head and just kind of pick around and see what I see.
Well, he's salt of the earth. I mean, you look at that Sinclair is the last of a dying breed of true full-service gas stations, where you can also get an oil change. You can get anything done in that, and it reminds me of my childhood. Going to the Sinclair station, and there it is. And my wife, she loves going there because she doesn't have to get out and pump her gas. She just absolutely loves that, right?
And Jim loves doing that. So that's his gig. And again, we're in the same business. I don't pump fuel; he does, and we share our work back and forth. And it's a great combination. Even though again he's on the left and we're on the right, and we have these calls, we have these conversations. And I'll tell you what, it's pretty nice to have not the fight, but the conversation.
So I would wonder, one of the things that he also did on the environment too was that he rejoined the Paris Climate Accord. Right?
Yes, he did.
And now that process is going to take 30 days. So I would probably look at 60 or 90 days from now, where there'll probably be some reports coming from the agency to Congress regarding, because he said, I direct the agencies to review more than 100 Trump actions on the environment. So,
but there's another end of that story there. The Trump the Paris Act said you are the least carbon providers in the world. So really, you don't even need to be on this program.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. I mean, that's a separate argument than the Keystone conversation.
Correct.
But it's still, I would assume because it takes 30 days that there's going to be another report. So my assumption would be 60 or 90 days from now, there's probably going to be some agency reports or agency reviews about the actions that were done in the previous administration. So,
and it's very tough to get the right news because you're so gun shy of listening to any news. How do you even separate this? So hearing from you at our local level is a great asset to the people who are listening, because now it's not CNNized, it's not ABCized. I mean, it's literally here's what you know, here's what we see, and people are going to listen to this directly.
Correct, and I think there's more to come on something like that. When somebody tells you to go review something, then I know that part of that review means you must, like we do that on the state level. We say, this task force will review and must, right? There's a must language. Must report to the, in this case, we always say must report to the leaders of the House and the Senate, and the chairs of whatever that review is going to be in. In this case, it would be the, Ways and Means, who oversees.
Right. What is that committee that oversees that?
Yeah, I don't know which committee it would go to, but my assumption is there's some language in it that says you must have a report done.
Okay. So at this point, we're going to move on to the next module. Everybody stand by.
For home and workplace comfort, we here at Dependable Heating and Air Conditioning have over 30 years of residential and commercial experience in replacing, repairing, and doing general maintenance on your heating and cooling equipment. Call the experts at Dependable Heating and Air Conditioning. For all your indoor comfort needs, we are located in Coon Rapids and serve the entire Twin Cities area. Call one of our professional technicians today at 763-757-5040. That's Dependable Heating and Cooling. Again, 763-757-5040, Dependable Heating and Air.
Okay, and we're back. We're back with Senator John Hoffman. He was giving his insights and his devoted his life to his craft, sitting in our Senate. And John, welcome back.
Hey, good to be back, Tim. Good to talk with you always.
Okay, this next segment we're going to have a little bit of an interesting conversation, and it's going to be about the siege on the Capitol. Now, as everybody knows in my shows, that I'm a big 2A guy. I'm not an riot insider. I'm not one of these guys who go out and say, "Hey, we're going to pick this fight." But I'm not. They also got to know that if they pick this fight, they picked it with the wrong dude, and they don't want to play that game. And that's just the way it is. I mean, that's what America was built on. You don't start the fight, but if you're going to bring it to us, you ain't going to like it.
Correct.
So, John, we all have this. Again, this news that we talked about in the last module, how we can't trust news at all, but what we don't understand is what exactly did these people think they were going to accomplish by busting into that Senate down there, to that House? And for let me rephrase and clarify that question or solidify this question for you. What were they going to gain? And do you really think that the Trumpers, and just because they wear a red hat does not mean they're Trumpers. I mean, we got camouflage on. We use that for a reason. What were these guys, these Antifa, these anarchists, these whatever these people were? Because you know what? I don't believe Trumpers are out there to stir stuff up. I believe they're conservatives. I think that they'll go if it's opened, but they won't go to break it in unless they're pushed. What's your thought?
Yeah, I mean, the FBI, everybody's doing their thing. I'm going to go back to Wednesday morning. I go to our state capitol, and I pull in to the driveway getting to the Senate building, and I'm met by Capitol Police and our finest. Our state patrol, Tim, are the absolute finest public servants we have in the state of Minnesota.
Awesome.
Period.
Awesome. Absolutely
Beyond. They're the most professional. They get it, right? And so, the one knew me, and he wanted to see my ID. He wasn't going to let me even get close to the building. So I whipped my ID out and I smiled at him, and he smiled back, and I went in and I got in, and I'm like, oh, what's going on? There was a whole different feeling on the state capitol level, right?
Right.
I noticed an increase in our state troopers and our DNR. Our DNR, are of course licensed law enforcement officials, right? The DNR conservation officers. They have just as much jurisdiction as a state patrolman does, right? And so they were there, and I'm in my office, and I was doing some work, and all of a sudden I get this notice, you might want to check out a cast, and one of the casts on one of the news, and it was showing these folks that were, storming the federal Capitol.
Uh-huh.
And at the same time, I knew that our state patrol was, there was people that were planning on coming to the state Capitol in St. Paul, and I'll tell you what, our state patrol went out and said to the folks that were in front of the state capitol, you have a right to be here. You have a right to protest. You have a right to your free, First Amendment. You have a right to do, but you do not have a right to breach this line. And made that very clear that they were not going to allow people to storm our state capitol that was happening in our federal capitol.
But don't you think that the guys in
and the people listened,
So there's no anarchists there.
Capitol.
Yeah.
So they listened to that. But in the meantime, I was feeling this anxiety. I'm watching this, and I'm just going, oh my gosh. And I don't care what side of the aisle or who it was, but the fact is, these individuals made a choice to do something that is just absolutely inconsistent with how I think people should act.
Peaceful transfer of powers, right? That's what we pride ourselves on for generations to come.
And we did have a peaceful transfer. And when all that crap was done, I sat there and I thought, look at this. And so I'm not even gonna get into a debate because a friend of mine said it was all Antifa, it was all these patriots.
So,
and I was like, well, I don't give
right.
I don't give a hoot. The fact is they did insurrection and did something that is just beyond imaginable, and it caused the anxiety that was there. It was brought back some really feelings, and so that happened, and it's like, oh my gosh, why did it happen? But later on that evening, Vice President Pence looked more presidential than the current president or the president at the time. Vice President.
Yeah, and a lot of people agree with that.
He was the one who contacted, the National Guard. He was the one who took leadership. He was the one who said, "This has got to stop," right? And I thought, wow, why did it take this guy 4 years to really? And he did a great job. The other thing that came out of it too is the Maryland. I think it was the Maryland governor.
Yeah, the Grail.
Couldn't get. There was something going on where they actually they have to get permission from somebody in the Pentagon or one of the 5 things, because he was all ready to go. He was all ready to send troops in there to protect folks, and he couldn't do it. But I'll set that aside. I think it was absolutely a tragedy to see. Yet in true American fashion, we came back and finished the job, like you said early on, right? You start something, we're going to finish it. We finished the job that night, or our elected officials finished the job that night, and we had a transition of power in the United States, and now it's going to be up to our law enforcement
to sift through all that, right?
To sort through this crap, right? And it is crap. I mean, Tim, this one woman gets arrested, and she kept saying, "Well, I was just doing the work what the president told me to do, and I got pepper sprayed." Well, and the interviewer said, "Well, where were you?" "Well, I was, I busted a window and went into the Capitol." Okay, you're telling everybody.
Yes, but that was her conception of that. Right. I mean, you're a common sense guy. Did you ever hear Trump say, "Go rip this thing open"?
I heard him. You know what though? I did hear him say, "We're going to march there, and I'm going to be right with you," and I'm going to leave it at that, Tim, because I mean that is out there. I heard that. I heard his son say that.
So political dynamite. I get it.
And it's, to me, that is not becoming of an elected official. I would never. Remember, I started out this conversation telling you our state patrol is an amazing group of people, and my wife was concerned of my own safety, and I did have some threats. I mean, there were some threats. I had to share it with, Chief Harrington, not Chief, he's a Commissioner Harrington, sent a notice. I shared it with our city administrator, just saying, I need to let you know that there's a heightened awareness. There are some elected officials who have actually had people show up at their house. One South St. Paul elected official, some folks blocked off his street and wouldn't allow his family to get home.
So this elected official, is he a Democrat guy?
Yeah, local Democrat.
Is he a 2A'er?
I don't know. I just know. I mean, I'm just anecdotally telling you that this was happening, and based upon the credible heightened. They put a heightened security. That's why the State Patrol were there IDing me a block away from the building, and I'm grateful that they were there, and I'm grateful every time I see them in the hallways. I'm grateful that they're out on the roads. I'm grateful, the service that they provide us.
Well, they're there to protect the sanctity of the environment.
That's it. And they're following. It's the rules. We establish rules of order in Minnesota. We establish rules of order in the United States. It's for all of us, right?
So now let's go back to the 2016 election when Trump come in. Are you familiar with what happened with the riots during that?
2016, I was in a battle for my own election. I mean, that was the closest election I had. Well, besides my first school board election, that was the closest ever. But it was pretty typical election in our Senate district, where the A side was Trump, the B side was
Hillary.
Clinton. I outperformed both of them, but I only won by 2 percentage points.
But there was no peaceful transition at that point.
There was a great peaceful transition, right?
Let's say protest.
Level.
Let's say riots and protests instead. Let's do it that way.
Were there?
Oh yes. Remember when they burnt the limousine up because it was Trump's and they started fires and it was all downtown by the Capitol and all that?
In St. Paul?
No. In down at the Capitol, in Washington.
Oh yeah. Yeah, nothing like this.
So
I'm not going to compare or contrast.
That wasn't too peaceful.
It wasn't too peaceful, but was it? Did law and order take over? Did they get it under control?
I believe they were less organized than they were in the 2020 election.
Yeah, I don't. You know, Tim, it absolutely makes me sick to see that who would put a noose up or start chanting, "We want to hang Mike." I mean,
yeah. Well,
say that's just absolutely beyond. When I heard those, and so as a state official, I'll let you know that we were under heightened security. We still are under heightened security. I think it's slowed down a little bit, but it goes to show you that there are some people out there who, remember what Jim Ramstad taught us about using common sense and being pragmatic. And what was your quote about?
Common sense ain't common enough.
Ain't common enough. What the hell happened to common sense ain't common enough, right?
Well, again, when Trump took over, let's think back to 2016, and everybody's upset. The left really hated him. Because first of all, he wasn't the right man for the job. He was the right job for the man. And that leads into some onion layers here, that sometimes you're not the right guy, but you get the right stuff done. And a lot of Trumpers think that. I kind of think that, if he would just stay off of Facebook and Twitter, that he would have been a lot more successful in this last election. And that's just his choice. That's the way he ran his administration. But the actress that took this head of Trump that was all bloodied and cut off and put it up on TV.
I remember that.
She's a left Democrat. And hold on now. We're not going to have dual standards here. Either this is going to apply one way or it's going to apply both ways. And that's what I think a lot of Trumpers are going, hold on.
She paid the price. It cost her millions. She lost so much. I mean, I don't know whatever else happened to it, but I know that it was a public stint that was not okay.
For sure.
That was gross. That was absolutely not okay. Because you know what? Regardless of who the president is, you got to respect the office of the presidency. Period.
If you respect the system, you should respect the office. Yes.
And this guy did not respect the system. His last couple of days, he did not. I mean, and you don't tell me he did, because he did not, Tim. I'm going to disagree with you 100%. I was so blown away to see George Bush. God, I miss George Bush. George Bush, Barack Obama, and Bill Clinton, three of them, and having a conversation, and it was just like, and these guys, political war that occurred between those three,
and no Trump was there. I get it. Yes, I seen that.
And to hear George, and then to hear them say, we're here to help you. Your success is our country's success. Wow. I mean, that was a breath of fresh air.
Well, there's probably some grandstanding going on there too, a little bit. Some of those guys are glory mutts,
Partisan. I don't know if you'd say that. George Bush was not a partisan grandstander at all. I mean,
no?
He was, interesting. But that was, you talk about that siege, and I just absolutely not one of our finest moments as a nation of people.
For sure. For sure. And again, the left's not a 2A system. The right is very 2A. And if you're going to go and try and do something, you don't try and do nothing with nothing, right?
Right.
You can't. If you're going to stage a coup or a takeover, you ain't going to do it with anything but other than 2A guys. So it's just so dynamite.
Yeah, it was.
One touch sparks it off.
I think didn't you see it? But didn't you get it? He had a sense of nationalism and almost a cult-like following, and then afterwards people saying, well, why am I getting arrested? I was just doing what the president asked me to do. And the one woman who was in tears because she got maced, and she said, I was told to do this. And I mean, this was an interview on a,
well, she was.
And the interviewer said, well, what's your name and where do you live? And she gave her name and where she lived. And it's like, okay, you've just now admitted that you broke into the Capitol. and it's like, where's the common sense in that, Tim? I mean, that
Her interpolation of things is no different than Jeffrey Dahmer's interpolation of things.
Or the state legislator from, I don't know, where is he, from Virginia or Maryland? He was videotaping, charging up the steps and videotaping, breaking into the state capitol. You don't do that. Of course, now he resigned his position, but he got a door knock. He got a door knock from the feds. I tell you what, it's going to take them months to sort this out.
Oh, it's going to be more than that. This is a crap sandwich, and they're in the middle of it. But they have to. That's the job.
I mean, that is their job. I mean, they're gonna have to sort this out because, and then the last time that happened was 1812. What happened to the people that did insurrection and tried to burn down the Capitol in 1812? What happened to every one of those folks, right? And the other thing too is, I believe, talk about executive orders, that our previous president did an executive order that if you do what just happened, as far as destroying government property, federal government property,
right?
He said minimum is 20 years, period. That's an EO. That's an executive order.
Do we think Biden will override that one?
He did not overdo that one. He did not. No,
so let's kick back to some Maxine Waters during the campaign field. Remember when Maxine Waters come out in public and says, how did she put that? We will do everything we can to destroy Donald Trump's chance at being reelected.
I don't remember. Where's she from? Maxine Waters, California, isn't she?
Whatever, like it matters at this point. But
I'm last time I looked, I was your state senator, Maxine Waters. I bet you, if you and I tried to call Maxine Waters, would she, somebody like that, would they call us back? I don't know, probably not. But I'll tell you what, you have my cell phone,
which I won't give out on the air, by the way. And who's the other guy? That guy who says, when they're down, we kick them. And that's not bipartisan.
Who said that?
Oh, where was his name?
When we're down, we kick them.
When they're down, we kick them. And he was briefing a crew of guys so that he could say, okay, here's what happens when they're down. And it's a black guy, gentleman, mustache. You've seen him all over the place, and I just was floored. Like, you don't say that, but this is not working together.
It comes back to your exactly. Look at me, Tim. 91% bipartisan. I still believe in the rule of compromise and the fact that we're here to get something done. I mean, I've got $110 million worth of infrastructure project last bonding cycle because I worked across the aisle with Jerry Newton, Jim Abler, and others, right?
Mm-hmm.
For our region. I mean, that's what it takes. It's your common sense thing. I mean, it just comes. That's it. Period.
And that's your claim to fame. That's why we can have these conversations.
All this other stuff is just so drama filled and doesn't make any logical sense, and why.
Okay, so segues into our last one. I got to take a commercial break. Stand by.
For home and workplace comfort, we here at Dependable Heating and Air Conditioning have over 30 years of residential and commercial experience in replacing, repairing, and doing general maintenance on your heating and cooling equipment. Call the experts at Dependable Heating and Air Conditioning. For all your indoor comfort needs, we are located in Coon Rapids and serve the entire Twin Cities area. Call one of our professional technicians today at 763-757-5040. That's Dependable Heating and Cooling. Again, 763-757-5040, Dependable Heating and Air.
We are back with Senator John Hoffman. And John, thanks for coming in today, or calling today.
Yeah. It's always good to be with you, Tim. This is just like hanging out at your shop. But it's, by the way, speaking of shops, I still, in my convertible, which is now in storage, I still got this sensor problem. And you're like, just bring it by. And every time I'm like, yeah, I'm going to bring it by. And then I'm like, I don't do it. So
no problem. We'll get to that. So we all know, I mean, if anybody knows you and knows they pay attention to local politics, that you're one of the go-to guys on Health and Human Services. Now, we've had discussions in the past with vulnerable adults. We've had discussions, and we all have mutual friends that are in that business and that system.
Right.
My question to you, John, is when COVID-19 hit the floor, we had a president that, you know, he was on page with it, but his pride was getting in the way of, okay, we're going to call this. That's my personal feeling, of course.
Mm-hmm.
We had a governor who was kind of overacting and overreached on a lot of personal infringements on you know, our constitutional rights. That's my personal feeling again, and you might have a different theory on that. But as COVID-19 progresses and mutates to COVID-19.5 or COVID-20, which we're seeing that now in the news, that migration of a change, because when they make a vaccine, it's pretty much good for one device. It's not good for 19, 19.5, 19.9, 19, 20, 20. It just doesn't work that way, not in the medical world. That's what my medical sources tell me. Can we and are we doing enough without stepping on these people's freedoms, rights, their burial rights, their last rights? Are we doing enough for the vulnerable people that are in our system, and without taking away so much that we don't have that post-Nazi era tell on your neighbors because you're having more than 5 guys in your house, that whole feeling of Nazi Germany? Are we doing enough?
That's the major question we've been asking that in our committee since last year. You know, what are we doing? You know, are we sure we're including and you listing who we're including? And I'm just talking about let's stay with the public health response, and then we'll go into the you know, the one size fits all policy responses that he did, which really affected a lot of individualized businesses, right?
Oh, for sure.
But I mean, there's two different things here. So number one, here's this ugly, mean virus, which, you know, a dear friend of mine who is a former state rep from Elk River, Nick Zerwas, he almost died from it. He's like, you know, Nick, and he's, you know, Mr. You know, I think he's a little bit farther right than you are, Tim. But he's been a dear friend for years, and you know, I was so mad. But he made it through, right? And so we keep coming back to saying, all right, how do we address this? What's the science? What was the science telling us?
How can you address it? That's a really big question.
It's exactly right. And
no one's ever been through this before.
Ever. And was our system, Mark Curran, state senator, would say, was our system ready for the potential of a pandemic like this?
Mm-hmm.
And his argument is no, it wasn't.
And I know Mark well.
Enough.
Yes.
And yeah, and so he's really, you know, his whole thing is, but what are you doing to have your systems in place? He's a systems guy, right? And I agree with him. What are you doing to have your systems in place in the event that this would happen again, right? And so, you know, you look at that and you go, well, were we doing all we can for our elderly? The answer is no, we weren't. Mm-hmm. You know, we were not at the very beginning, and as such that it caused a lot of anxiety, and a lot of elected officials kept saying, well, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? Why are you doing this? Right? I mean, those things were still sitting out there, and you know, I had some relatives die that were in nursing homes that couldn't go visit them, and you know, now they're you know, the funeral has now been pushed off until there's a time when we can, you know, have it, right? I mean, those things are there. This ugly little virus disrupted so much in our world, right? And even to the point where, you know, it disrupted not only this generation, but generations to come. They're going to deal with the trauma, you know, the kids that were going to deal with some of the trauma that's there, right? But what did we do that was fast, right? And if it wasn't for the CARES Act coming in, right, the Federal Coronavirus Relief Fund, we acted pretty doggone fast to get that out. $317 million, I believe, was given to our larger metropolitan counties. $841 million went to the remaining counties, cities, and townships. Right? There was a formula that was distributed out there.
Okay.
$250 million went to schools to help them deal with in-person instruction, online learning, and then to address some learning losses. $100 million went to housing support. Then we beefed up almost $200 million on COVID testing, right? And all those funds that are out there, those are federal dollars, must be spent by December 31st. Now, on the state side, we then passed in March out of our reserves. Thank God our state was fiscally responsible to keep a positive reserve, right?
Mm-hmm.
We took $555 million in state appropriations, and those went to $200 million went to healthcare providers, specifically on the continued care side of it, and then $200 million went to a COVID-19 Minnesota fund, which then goes through state agencies, child care workers, homeless populations, business loan guarantees, food shelves, etc. Right? I mean, there's just a whole group of that. So the infrastructure's there. Okay, now here it is. But then the question comes up is like, okay, so how did we? Added one more. Federal grants and formula allocations that were sent directly from the federal government to our state agencies was like $1.4 billion. And that included education, food security, housing, and transportation support, right?
Okay.
But there was still some management of this then rolling out, lots of miscommunication about how it's going to go and who's going to go to and how are people responding.
Sure.
And it was this.
And do you feel that's a fight between the left and the right on this?
I just think it's no, not a focus. No, at this point, I'm staying on the public health side of it, saying how was this then rolled out? For example, which then leads into then the administration decides to do a one-size-fits-all. So they were treating Anoka County the same as they were treating Bertha, Minnesota at the time, at the very beginning, right?
Okay.
And they weren't treating it different. Why was it like downtown Anoka? I couldn't go to Peterson's Shoes, which I know there'd only be 2 or 3 people in at a time to buy shoes, right? Social distancing would have been there.
Sure.
But I could go up the street to Target. And,
right, where there's thousands of people shopping in the aisles.
Right?
And people see that.
And people saw that, and so they're like going, well, wait a minute, what's going on here, right? And the other thing we did on the positive side is that, we went into our unemployment. We were another one of the few states who actually had $1 billion in our unemployment reserve. The formula behind that is set up. Once that's spent, the feds automatically fill that up, right? States that didn't have that reserve set aside didn't get it automatically filled up. So we actually did okay. I mean, as far as getting our state unemployment insurance extensions and did that right. Now, again, it comes down to how was it managed out? Well, it was terrible because people couldn't get online. They'd wait for phone calls. They were on hold for days. It's like, wow. So on one hand, it's like, the infrastructure was there, but, then how it was managed out. And that was probably due to a capacity issue, right?
So inefficiency or capacity? I was going to ask that question.
Capacity issue, that you didn't have enough, staff assigned, from a state agency, right? Especially on the unemployment.
Okay.
If you don't beef up, your phone calls are going to increase by X amount, right?
Oh, yeah.
But did you increase your capacity by X amount?
Right, to answer it, yes.
You know what I mean? I mean,
yep.
if all of a sudden you realize your business, you and your kids all of a sudden realize that, oh my God, there's a hot rod association has taken over the whole North Metro area, and they've now said to us, you're going to be the go-to shop for all the oil changes. I'm just making that up,
sure.
Right? You're not ready for that.
We're not ready. And how could anybody be ready for this?
Right. And so, it really was, it reminded me of the video. You ever see that? You working this is kind of like building a plane while it's flying kind of thing.
Like doing a tune-up on a car when it's running. Yes.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
And that same, it's just like, oh my God, right?
Or changing a valve on a motor while the heart's running. Yeah, the doctors have that saying. I get that.
Oh yeah, and what the administration was trying to do is a couple of things. Number one was to try to decrease the threat of health and safety in Minnesota, right? Because the administration kept saying, we're going to base this on data and science, right?
I kept hearing that, yes.
Yeah, but there was a but clause, right?
Yeah, conjunction.
But remember, we have 86 counties in Minnesota, and they all operate a little bit differently, right? Every county is different.
Okay.
And the attempt to beating the virus, right? That's why they kind of rolled that out, which then was at odds. And I voted with the Republicans to remove his executive powers.
How did that go? Did that
multiple times I did that, and because at the time I believed that there was not a solid enough response to our most vulnerable. It was just like, well, why are you guys making this decision on this? Why did you, right? And so
did you have political fallout because of that?
A little bit, but I joined ranks. I joined ranks with Jim Abler, and we kept saying, well, why are you doing it this way? And to their credit, the Department of Human Services started pulling Jim and I in on why they're doing what they're doing, right? Why they were.
Yeah, explain yourself. Yep.
But it took Jim 13 emails. I mean, some of the things that were happening. It's like, why are these things still happening? And why couldn't people set aside their differences and say, look, we have a new threat.
Their prejudices.
Can we all be in this threat?
They're not having differences. They're having prejudices.
Yeah. I mean, in what good, bad, or indifferent, the fact is, how can somebody set labeling? I'm going to call it labeling, or how can you set that aside in order to go back and say,
we need to fix this as a team.
Right. Let's do this. Right. And so, and the same thing. I'm glad they now with the vaccine distribution. They had they pulled a group of folks together to say, all right, how are we going to prioritize this? And they have that rolled out. They get the group 1A. I mean, they put everything in 1A, 1B, 1C, 2, A, B, and C, right? Phase. Mm-hmm. They phase these things in. And here's the kicker. So they identified priority group 1A, right? Those are healthcare personnel and residents of long-term care facilities, grandpa and grandma, right?
Okay.
That's 500,000 Minnesotans right there.
Oh boy.
And we only got 184,000 vaccines in that first phase, right?
So what do you see going forward that the state, the House, the Senate, everybody, including our governor, can focus on during the next? Okay, because this isn't going to be the last time. And I always tell everybody, what did you do last year when the flu was out? What did you do when swine flu was out? What did you do when the other things were doing what they were doing and didn't shut down the world? So what do you think, in a nutshell, that the state, the governor, can do to say, next time this happens, we're going to do what?
Well, I think that you raise it. Those questions are going to be asked this session. I mean, that clearly there's a committee that gets into those processes questions, and I know in the Senate, I don't know who has it in the House, but in the Senate, that is a data decision point making is I think that would go through Mark Curran's committee. But there are two things that we need to look at, right? Mm-hmm. Number one, Minnesota has to have a guidance for allocation and prioritizing, right, the COVID-19 vaccine, right, and the response to COVID.
Okay.
Wherever the next COVID is, right?
Whatever it is, right.
And then number two is we need to match up the National Academies of Science, right, on the federal level. They came up with an ethical framework for decision making that states to use, right? So are we matching up with the National Academies of Science that are through the federal government to make sure that everybody's, I don't care what the page looks like, but everybody better be on the same page, right? That's the thing. You want those ships going in the same direction.
Usually.
And then it's but the other thing is, folks got to be also open to hearing what other people, there's this transparency, but there's dual culpability of, am I listening to what people are telling me? Am I doing, and I did that. That's why, when I saw firsthand Abler and I fighting for disability services funding, and we called it retention, and there is a way that the state can utilize the federal drawdown dollars without impacting their state. And the Feds, Centers for Medicaid Services, gave them the option to do that. So, we weren't going anywhere with that. So we created, out of the CARES Act money, that this money shall go to these services, right? But rather than people going, yeah, this makes sense. I mean, we in the Senate passed that bill 3 times, Tim. 67 zip, right? It was the most bipartisan piece of legislation in the history of the Senate in the last 8 years I've been there. But I could not for the life of me understand why it became a political pawn for some other people.
Well, it's an election year. It's an election year. You got the lefts and the rights, and you got the haters and the non-haters.
And Jim Abler and I were banging our head against the wall, not understanding was it. And so we're now saying, well, was it my delivery? Was it the optics of how I presented this? Is this not making sense to people? Why wouldn't you just want to say? And I knew that was not true. My delivery was okay, because when Mark Curran looked at Jim and I and he said, "This is what government's about, you guys. This stuff right here, taking care of these people, the most vulnerable are elderly people with disabilities. This is why we exist.
Yep.
That's it." And our friend Senator Curran, Mac Jones would say, "Yeah, well, he hates government bureaucracy." He's like, "No, I hate ineffective government."
Yeah, I've heard that.
You've heard that, right? So
I have heard that.
So it's good to throw that in there. But then I sat there and I went, no, I think we're doing it right, but why are people trenching in? And it comes down to, where's the honorable intentions in this? And so if anything, I think you want to look back and say, we need to set aside, once again, I'm going to quote Jimmy Ramstead, the rammer, you got to leave your ego out in the hallway on these conversations, Tim.
And that's great advice. We are wrapping up to 17.47 seconds into the third final of this deal. Parting words, John. What have you got to say for the people listening? And again, there's not just local, but there's going to be stuff that they can learn in 11 different countries where this is being broadcast. What do you got to say for everybody?
I think we need to recover and rebuild from this COVID. We need to keep our shared values, in place, and really set aside our egos and do what's right. Constituents, stay informed. Making sure that they're not just taking one person's side of the story, but rather they're really looking at it, going, all right, well, what's the bigger picture here, and how can I get that bigger picture help to my elected official, and stay in touch. People, stay in touch with me. Absolutely.
Okay, and with the stay in touch here, do you want to put on your official how to call? Go ahead.
Yeah, J. Hoffman, JHOFFMAN at Senate.mn. That's my email. John Hoffman MN.com is my website, and then that's just has but my official stuff though is J. Hoffman at Senate.mn, and you can actually go in there and request to get put on my e-news, and if you need to call and talk to my staff, it's 651-296-54. So thanks, Tim.
And again, I can attest to John. I mean, I've talked to him several times, and he comes to some of our car shows in the Dayton Car Show. He is very accessible. He listens. He likes to get engaged, and if he feels there's something wrong, he's going to do it right. So that's about it for HuttCast. Again, HuttCast is a pragmatic way of looking at things. And John, I want to thank you very much for calling in. And maybe we can have you back on the show for some other discussions, and we can bring
Senator Jim Abler, Republican.
Jim Abler.
Absolutely, yeah.
So maybe we could get Jim to sit in the studio with us and have some conversation as well.
Sounds like a winner to me.
Thank you very much, and that's all for HuttCast. And that's a wrap for HuttCast. HuttCast is, again, a pragmatic approach to seeing things how some people see them. If you like our show, give us a thumbs up on the Facebook site or on the website that's just about ready to roll. Hopefully by the first of the next year, we'll have this thing up and running where you can get all the backstory and some of the research we did provided these podcast/IE HuttCast. Again, for HuttCast, thank you again. Have a wonderful evening.